Welcome to the Life Curation Podcast. I'm your host, Andrina Tisi. Together, we will explore thoughts, inspirations, and conversations that feed our soul, spark the mind, and nourish the body. Thank you so much for being here to learn and grow, and for walking this journey called life with me. Welcome to another episode of the Life Curation Podcast. Super happy as always that you're here, whether it's your first time or you've been here numerous times. Thank you so much. And before we dive into today's episode with this very special guest, I am happy to announce that in March, I am holding a long weekend retreat in the Swiss mountains. And there are still a few beds and mats available. So take a look. The link is in the show notes. As well, I'm super stoked that after 2 years, the Vision Board Workshop is back in Zurich. Also in March. And in the last 2 years, I really manifested a whole lot. And if you've been following me on social media, you have witnessed a little bit of that. And in that workshop, I'm thrilled to share all the different tools that I practice and that help me beyond the vision board. The links to that is also in the show notes. Now, this summer, I attended the Generative Trance Workshop in Abano, Italy with Stephen Gilligan. And I'm so honored and happy to have him as my guest today. Stephen is a psychotherapist, an author, a workshop leader, a storyteller, and transformation specialist. And he says that from a very young age, he was astonished and amazed that the words people spoke often didn't match what he felt and saw in them. So he knew from early on that psychotherapy was his calling. And he then went to Stanford University and earned his Ph.D. in research psychology. And from there, he has been practicing, writing, teaching as a psychotherapist and coach. And he's always looking for ways to absorb the countless contradictions and struggles of consciousness into generative integration. And into exactly that, we dive deep into our conversation today. So, in this conversation, like I said, Stephen is going really deep with his knowledge and his wisdom. And you might want to listen to this conversation more than once to really get all of it. I wish you lots of inspiration, lots of insights, and fun and joy. Thank you for being here. Well, welcome to the Life Curation Podcast, Stephen.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
And I had the huge honor and pleasure to be in Abano with you.
Yeah.
And it was really an amazing week for me and on so many different levels. So I'm super excited to have this opportunity to speak to you and to share what you have to share really with the audience of my podcast. So I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
So the kind of the theme or the topic of that week in Oppenau was generative trance. And I mean, I know your work is that, but also more, and we'll dive into a little bit different things. But just to start with, and I know you're a young grandfather. So how old is your granddaughter now?
River is my granddaughter, and River is about 7.5 months, and they live here on my property. My old office is in the front of the property. I turned over to my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, and River.
Nice.
So I get to see her every day.
That's beautiful. So it must be amazing to see her grow.
It's amazing. It really, it's one of the most interesting, amazing things I've ever experienced in my life.
Very touching, beautiful. So how would you, or maybe you have already, explained generative trance to her?
It's at 7.5 months, I don't think you're doing much explaining, you're just doing connection.
Yes.
So I think maybe that question could be more properly addressed by sort of inverting it and say, what does River, what does an 8-month-old baby teach you about generative trance? Teach us big kids about generative trance. So, the thing about, I mean, there was one of the great founders of family therapy, Carl Whitaker, who was like one of Erickson's contemporaries, was the guy that I thought matched Milton Erickson's creativity. And he used to say that unconditional love is impossible after 2 years old.
Wow.
And I used to fight him on it, I thought, oh no, but I have come, it's one of those statements that you hear, that you contemplate over many, many years, and then you realize, yeah, I think he's right. So the thing about 8-month-olds is they don't have any secondary consciousness.
Yeah.
And so everything is very, very pure. Everything is very, very much just present. So that's what we're looking to do in generative trance, this unbounded curiosity that is not being blocked out by a conceptual level. This sense of relentless experimentation, this sense of play, this sense of really being guided by just organismic rhythms, and even though the grown-ups in River's life are responsible for being able to respond to those rhythms, but she lets I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need connection, I want to do this, and so forth. And that's what we're looking to reactivate or reprioritize in generative trance. I could say it in another way, that human beings we're all creating our reality. We have upstairs, we have these two very, very different brains. We have a right brain, which is basically nonverbal. And people like Ian McGilchrist, the Oxford neuroscientist, has said that's the primary brain. That's the connection to life. But it has no words. It doesn't have language, logic, or linearity. And that is what we might call the creative unconscious. And then, over time, I presume, in River gets especially about 5 or 6, the brains are pretty well differentiated. And so you get that other brain, which is basically a conceptual or virtual or primarily a verbal brain that is secondary to the creative consciousness of the right brain. So trance, particularly generative trance, is reactivating that sort of base of the creative, unbroken wholeness of the nonverbal intelligence, and trying to make use of it in positive ways.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a big question. And I mean, we spend an entire week on it, but how can we access it? From what you're saying is like we have it, and then we kind of, I don't know if lose is the right word, but it's just kind of
we do lose it.
We do lose it, yeah. Okay.
Well, I should say, one of the interesting things that I was just mentioning this Oxford neuroscientist, Ian McGilchrist, who I think is doing extraordinary work. And he's sort of revisiting a lot of the neuropsychology of the two brains.
Yes.
And one of the things he says is the left brain, which is secondary, it has these very pale images, virtual representations, and it thinks it's the world.
Yes.
But maybe even a more limiting way, it cannot feel the body directly.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
That you have to go through the right brain in order to feel the body. So, all of our conditioning and our education and all of our institutions are fostering this increasing isolation into the virtual, conceptual left brain, and it's the consequences are mounting.
Absolutely, and it's so much what you've already said, and also during that week with you reminded me of somatic experiencing that I'm currently in training with, and it's so much also what you said about the
close cousin.
Yes, exactly. What you also said about the curiosity and the play and the rhythm, like approaching trauma work or like whatever, or sensations or images, whatever it is, with curiosity, that what comes up, and also noticing the somatic rhythm, like the vibrations, whatever comes up, and trusting the body.
That's right. By the way, you're mentioning somatic experiencing. Peter Levine is a neighbor of mine. I can almost see his house from here. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so exciting.
We're in this little beach town up on the coast of up from San Diego, Encinitas.
Okay.
We grow surfers and poinsettia flowers and yoga studios.
Yes.
And Peter lives right on the on the cliff overlooking the ocean.
Wow.
So we bump into each other in the grocery store now and again.
How cool is that?
Yeah, so that sense, and to me, that's one of the beautiful legacies of Milton Erickson.
Mm-hmm.
This sense of really tuning into the rhythms and the resonance and all the nonverbal creative patterns of the organism.
Yeah.
And very importantly, for any of the therapeutic work, to be tracking and asking the organismic pattern to be the primary guide in the work. And that's the part of Peter's work that's now sort of growing in a number of related areas of trauma that I think is in some ways the most radical and the most helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, I know it for myself. If I'm, not connected to myself, I'm also not connected to my body.
Yeah, that's the starting point.
Right. And you also talk about the three mind intelligence. So like somatic, heart, and mind. Is that what it refers to, right?
Not quite. I've been working professionally for 45 years, so there's a few different versions here and there, but the three minds in those models are head verbal mind, body somatic mind, and relational community mind.
Okay.
And I say those are like the three major influences. Is that what's being said upstairs? That's the social, cognitive, verbal, avatar. So it's not just your voice, but it's the social voice. It's the, you know, the parental interjects, all of that. The body is a totally different language and logic and consciousness. And as I said, you know, in our contemporary cultures, we pretty much suppress it and regard it as an idiot or as a dumbass that needs to be pushed around. And then thirdly, very importantly, the relationship communities that you carry that are actually right there, but also we carry in our heads.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so when you say this is who I am or this is what I want, what's the inner chorus of people that you're holding that in, and what do they say? Not only verbally, what do they say with their eyes? What do they say? You know, so forth. So with things like trauma, where trauma is becoming a major problem, it's not the trauma itself. It's that the trauma has gotten neuromuscularly locked.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these same things over and over. And one of the worst curses of a trauma is you get this voice, you should be treated poorly, or your body doesn't need respect, or you deserve to be violated, and so forth. And those become sort of your guiding trance inductions, if you will, that give rise to all of the sequelae of PTSD.
Yeah.
Where, you know, it's like, well, I'm not taking care of my body. I'm continuing to get into intimacy relationships that are damaging. I have issues with food or alcohol. I can't trust human beings, so I try to get that warmth and relaxation from drugs or alcohol or food or whatever. I
Mm-hmm.
think those are all coming from this locked idea that can come from trauma, which is your body deserves to be abused.
Mm-hmm. And how can we kind of change that trance, right? Or change that law?
Yeah. Well, you know, one of the ideas in trauma these days, I think, is a good one, is that PTSD is frozen processing. It's non-metabolized experience. That's what the EMDR people would say.
Mm-hmm.
And what, you know, what that means is an experience, you know, enters the nervous system, and it moves through this series of steps and this series of languages for it to complete itself. And at that point, it's something that's happened in your life, you
Yeah.
know, and you have a relationship to it. But at any point in the processing of that experience, you can go into lockdown. And when you go into lockdown, that means that the experience is frozen in your mind body. So that's what I think PTSD is. It's a frozen experience that keeps activating in an attempt for healing.
Mm-hmm.
But every time the experience that had to be dissociated from, you know, and I always say to people, when you're in a trauma, dissociation is an act of self-love.
Yeah.
You know, because trauma, you'd say, is defined by this physiological shock that in a relationship that's so threatening that you didn't have the resources
It's a form
to
of
be able to.
protection.
Yeah. So you had to go away, and that locks down everything. So in order to integrate it and to move beyond the trauma, you have to relax in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But people, you know, as soon as somebody carrying trauma feels relaxation, they start to panic.
Exactly.
Because they feel, oh shit, here we go again. And so you have to have a good connection with somebody else, generally. That's what the therapeutic connection is all about. And then the way that you're connecting to the person is more like how I would talk to my granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean and I don't mean to infantilize to somebody, or the way I talk to my dog who is right here. It's the way, and this is something I learned from Erickson, the way your eyes and your voice touches the resonance in the body.
Mm-hmm.
Is you need that sort of kind-hearted resonance to begin to relax. And so that's the first connection, and then the communication becomes more non-verbally primary. And then very importantly, and this is, I think, what somatic experiencing is really good at, you realize that the organism has its own way of healing. And so it can open a door for, you don't know exactly how long, but it could be 2 seconds. It could be 5 seconds. And so you see, okay, I open just a little bit and then I have to close back. My body has to close back down. If you're not sensitive to that, you're re-traumatizing the person.
Yeah.
Because you say, okay, open up. And they open up, and then their organism starts to pull back. And if you're still in open up while the organism is pulling back, you're basically repeating the trauma. You know, my body wasn't respected. My body wasn't listened to. And so that sense of feeling how to touch positive places, very importantly, how long you can stay there before you respect the need to shut down and to get more distance. So that's a big chunk. The other chunk, if you look at, I may have been talking about this in Italy last summer. There's a really helpful meta-analysis of lots and lots of different trauma studies that look at a couple of things. One is, of the people who experienced by a very severe definition of trauma that would include physiological shock, how many of those people develop PTSD?
Mm.
And having, when I was a psychotherapist with a full-time practice for many years, my two main populations were couples and trauma survivors.
Okay.
So I was a little surprised to hear it's only about 1 in 5 or 1 in 4.
Wow.
So 75% of people get knocked down. They get whacked really hard. They will remember it, I'm sure, for the rest of their life as probably the worst thing that ever happened to them. But after a while, they find a way to get back up and reclaim their life. About 25% stay down, and that's what we would call PTSD. They're caught in the experience, and it's just repeating itself in many ways. So that's one really interesting data from that large meta-analysis. The second is the people who are recovering. What's happening differently from them than from the people who are staying locked in PTSD? And that, I think, that tells us a lot about what we can do therapeutically. If you look at the past, people who have some positive early bonding experiences when they're young, like my granddaughter's age,
yes,
they recover faster because they have in their system, I know there are people that love me and care about me.
It's a different resilience, right?
That's exactly it. It's a different resilience. And the previous trusting, positive experiences of bonding give you a stronger resilience. And even if, like, what's interesting about some of those studies, if your parents or your grandparents went through severe trauma, like war, for example, or, they had to escape their country, political, whatever. That really breaks your bonding capacity, and that reduces the likelihood of resilience. Secondly, you're in the present, the degree of social connections, positive social connections that you have. So friends or family that really are tuned in and love you and insist on staying connected with you. And, it makes sense if I'm traumatized and I think I just want to stay home, I don't want to go out, but there's a big family birthday party, or, there's a baptism, or you go to your grandchild's football game, and everybody's on the sideline, and your grandchild scores a goal, and those are the moving out of the trauma field and back into the healthy healing field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anything that you can do that gets somebody back into some positive experiences of human and embodied connection, that will help your healing.
Yeah, I think it comes to mind the human animal, and I find it really interesting. I mean, because we are, we're not a lone animal, right? We like to be in community, and we need that. And I think also what we've experienced over the last 3 years or 2.5 years, right?
You're right. You're right.
Hasn't made all of that easier.
It's made it a lot harder.
Exactly. And then suddenly also connection becomes dangerous. And then we have a whole other level of trauma or of trance, and that needs to heal now as well, right? And I think that's for, on a collective level, that's a huge topic.
Yeah, you're really touching on, I think, the core. And we're mammals first and foremost. Our roots, our base, are mammalian, and mammals need each other. I mean, it's sort of funny. We're always talking about my grandchild, and my daughter says she's so social. I said,
Yes.
she's human.
Yeah, exactly.
She just loves to see her family and her grandparents and her aunt, and she loves to be in their company and do show. Now she's look at me, I can stand. And but we are not whole. We're only a little fragment as individuals. So that's why I say that field mind where we're talking about the cognitive, the somatic, and the field.
Yes.
Because without our contextual community, we're just little fragments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You also mentioned your dog, and I have a dog too, and she's lying next to me as well. And it's so interesting to watch, that animal and how she processes things, right? When she get I notice, of course, the shaking a lot, right? Like she sees a cat and gets too excited, and of course then like a minute later she calms down a little bit and she shakes it off in a way, right? And
She shakes it off.
Yeah. And we've unlearned that.
Yeah, and I think partly it's developmentally, we're now much more capable of not shaking it off.
Yeah.
I mean, now I remember, I'm sort of harking back with my granddaughter, is my daughter grew up in this house. She's 30 years old. And I remember she had such trouble sleeping. And every now and again, I'd sort of lose my temper and tell her, just go to sleep. And I'd feel so guilty.
Yeah.
And then I was sure when I came in the next morning that she'd still be brooding about it, which is what people do in my Irish family. and, and within 5 minutes, she's through it.
Yeah.
So that, as you're saying, that shaking it out, which, you know, is one of the things that Peter talks about, and he really, I think, did some really good work in situating trauma in terms of looking at things like animals in the wild who get attacked, and seeing that how animals in the wild go into that sort of trauma trance,
Yeah.
to play dead, and all this sort of peculiar physiology on the outside, nothing's moving, but on the inside, there's very amplified high physiology. And then when the danger removed, and this is what I meant by the relaxation, it's only when they go into relaxation that they're able to reorganize the system.
Yeah.
But what you get in trauma is people get terrified that relaxation in their body means that here comes the trauma again.
Yeah, it's dangerous. Relaxation is dangerous.
It's dangerous.
And the
That's
body
right.
is and the body is dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And
So
so,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry. Go ahead.
it's just, I don't know if you'd call it a re-education, but we're really, you know, one of Einstein's questions was, you know, one of the most important questions that in the world is the universe friendly?
Yeah.
And how we answer that question, sort of, a lot follows from that. So is your body friendly?
Yeah. That's a
Um,
it's a good question. I mean, I think
yeah,
it gives a lot of insights to see what pops up for somebody, right?
yeah, it's a real learning experience. And part of that is, you know, speaking of other great Swiss people, Carl Jung,
Yeah.
one of my favorite quotes of his was, the first half of your life belongs to other people. So it's what other people are telling you, and what other people are saying. That's sort of your primary cognitive mind. And he said the second half of your life belongs to you. So you may have been taught, you know, in your family, implicitly, explicitly. I mean, I grew up very Catholic. I went to all Catholic schools, and very, you know, very Catholic. And the messages that I got about the body, you know, were like guilt and, you know, repression and all that. So it's taken, I'm still not done, but it's taken quite a journey to say that it's my voice that is closest to my body.
Yeah.
And I am really committed to letting my body, just to let everybody know, is that life can be trusted as long as you are trusting your body and have that sort of attentiveness to know what your body needs at any given point in time.
Yeah. And I think there we're kind of coming back to the curiosity, and also the word befriending comes into me. And I think what you always, I mean, we did a lot of beautiful exercises in Upper, and there was always this aspect of welcoming what's here.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Yeah. And again, I mean, if we were to harken back to, you shouldn't talk to me about my granddaughter too much, because everything becomes about my granddaughter.
That's okay. I think it's
But
beautiful.
but at that age, it's like that's really the primary thing we're looking to do, is welcome. And
Yeah.
she's got no capacity to be plotting or planning or misrepresenting herself. So everything she's saying and doing, it's just straight, pure communication.
Yeah.
And so that way of welcoming is crucial. It's always like the first step. It's the first step. Welcome.
Yeah, because I also think like so often certain feelings or certain sensations or thoughts we don't want. We want to push it away because maybe they're uncomfortable, or again they're scary, and or maybe we feel shame around it, whatever it is. And just by that, just even by this intention or this word of welcome,
Yeah.
it can soften.
I
For me, it can really soften, right?
Yeah, that's right. As soon as we reject something in our experience, that's the first step in creating a symptom.
Yeah. Yeah.
So people say, well, what's the alternative? And often people think, well, alternative is just to let it overwhelm me and let it sort of take away, my self-presence and so forth. But really what I think, in any sort of mature sense, is to cultivate this capacity for mindfulness or centering so that we can notice things as they are and as they arise in our body. We can touch them with kindness and curiosity, but that mindfulness gives them a place to be held.
Yeah.
Not like a box, but sort of like a quivering space in our center, so that it's a part of us, but it's not all of us. And that then allows us to begin to have a curious, skillful relationship to whatever has come up. And it's that shifts a seemingly negative experience into a positive resource.
And I think what you just said, it's part of us, but it's not all of us, right? I can be afraid, but I can also be excited.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? I can have a trauma, but it doesn't have to be all of me, or you know what I mean? There's different aspects of it. And I think just seeing that it's part of me, but it's not all of me, gives me then also opportunity and potential, or a sense that there is possibility of healing and transformation.
That's it. That's, to me, what the generative trance work is about, which is going beneath the conceptual or the muscular experience that the ego is holding, releasing and relaxing the body and opening up, welcoming first non-negative, the non-traumatic. So one of the questions that we pursued in the training is, when you need to really connect with yourself, what really works well for you?
Yes, exactly.
And so for one person, it might be, I walk in the mountains, or might be I listen to music, or it might be that I go for a walk, or it might be that I meditate, or it might be that I cook, or it might be that I garden. And what we do in the trance work, and this is the natural trance work of Milton Erickson, is that we reactivate that experience in the nervous system.
Yeah.
And so now that's your base. And if we get 2 or 3 of them, now you're in this field where you've got lots of different resources. And, sometimes, I don't know if we did in Habano, this little mind experiment, thought experiment of imagining yourself out in the forest, and you come to a place, and on the left side is a house that says that the house of no resources. And on the right side, the house of resources. And you tune into a difficult experience, something you're struggling with. And then you go on to the resource house, where there's all these wonderful experiences. The people see you, people are dancing with you, they're very kind people, and see what happens with the experience in that. And then step out. And then, I tell people, You don't have to go into the other room full. As soon as your body feels okay, that's enough. That's good. So just tune to the place, the space of no resources, and start stepping towards that. And then see what is your relationship to that struggle, that challenge that is in your life in that space.
Yeah.
And when you see the size, the difference, it becomes a lot clearer.
Yeah. And do you do you suggest people to do that with somebody, or can somebody practice that also on their own?
Yes. Both.
Both, yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately, anything you're doing with another person, you want to be able to learn to do with yourself.
Yeah.
So, how do you know when it's time to reach out to somebody else, whether it's a professional therapist or a friend who you can trust? Well, you look to deal with something on your own. And if each time that you do, you sort of fall apart and disconnect, and you sort of only come to a little while later, that's telling you we get by with a little help from our friends.
Yeah.
I need to do this in a trusting relationship. So we see that, when I work with people, and it's something that has become more important to me over the years, is that to kind of do this psychoeducational stuff, and also including the person's conscious mind as a really integral part of the work. Because, me as a therapist, I'm rarely present with you, but you're there all the time.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to recognize these trouble spots, or recognize these trigger points? And what does it mean to immediately take that as a cue that you go back into your safe space, into your centered place, into your resource place?
Yeah, and then it becomes much more an integration and healing, really.
The problem is always in the relationship with something. That's what, like, Viktor Frankl said, that's what Milton Erickson said. We tend to think, oh, the problem is in the experience, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's in the relationship to it.
Yeah.
So when I'm in the presence of that experience, it threatens me or shuts me down or disconnects me, and then I respond by trying to control it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So how can I deal with these sort of ego challenges, these ego threats, by using them as cues to center and open? That's, I did martial arts for 27 years, and partly because to deal with all the violence from my alcoholic father in my family. And I did Aikido for the last 17 years, and that's what Aikido is. It's becoming centered and moving out of harm's way, and then never opposing the violence, but looking to deactivate it. That's what Milton Erickson's work was. This whole sense of welcome, it sort of gets into, what does it mean to welcome the symptom? What does it mean to welcome the obstacle?
Yeah.
And it's a skill, so it doesn't mean just flat-footedly saying, okay, do whatever.
Yeah.
You can only do it if you're able to maintain your first commitment to a connection with yourself. That's training.
Yeah.
That's a training.
And practice.
Every day.
Every day, exactly.
Every day.
Yeah.
And your problems are telling you where your practice needs to be. Your problems are telling you where your edge is that you're working on. And so you take this sort of gratitude towards them. There are always going to be problems in your life. They're mirrors of where your edge is.
Yeah, there are
As soon as you say, like what a trauma perpetrator would say, as soon as you attack yourself, I'm an idiot, I'm a coward, I'm stupid, why didn't this happen? Or if you're primarily focused on blaming the other, there's no play, there's no creativity, there's no learning, there's no generativity that's there.
Yeah, and in that, like you mentioned, the symptoms, or maybe the problems or the triggers, these are our teachers in a way.
They are. That's it. And you realize, okay, and self-care and self-connection, I can only have a healing relationship with some other, some whatever it is, if I'm able to remain connected with me.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of like, getting back to what we're talking about some of the real strengths that I see in somatic experiencing. It means that I only open myself to threatening people to the extent that I can stay connected with me. So in Aikido, there's a term called ma'ai, which means optimal distance, where I'm far enough away that I'm out of harm's way, but I'm close enough to have the connection that allows some sort of shift to happen. And your optimal distance at one point may be far, far, far away. That's what the dissociation that you may have learned, that's what it was there for. It was there to create a distance where you weren't destroyed by something.
Yeah. One of my practices is, in that word connection, it's always like, well, connected to myself and connected to the other, or connected to the outside and connected to the inside. Because if I'm only connected to me, then I'm shutting myself off. But if I'm only connected to the outside, then I'm not connected. Then I lose myself, right? So I think to learn that both is possible and both is needed.
That's the thing about generativity, is that the basic relationship is the connection of opposites. So, Niels Bohr, one of the founders of quantum physics, all the way back in the 20s, a century ago, used to say there are two types of truth. In the shallow truth, the opposite of a true statement is false. In the deeper truth, the opposite of a true statement is equally true. And getting back to that Swiss guy, Dr. Jung, he resurrected a number of terms from the Greeks. And one of them was enantiodromia, which means not only does everything contain its opposite, but everything, like that yin-yang symbol, everything is becoming. So my need for connection with myself rolls into my need for connection with others, which tucks back into my need for connection with myself. So it's that both and that is the creative wholeness.
Absolutely. And I think then, the word polarity comes to my mind as well, where, I think in the world, the polarity gets even bigger and bigger. And, when we can say like, hey, the both and, it's not one or the other, it's just, again, welcoming both or seeing both, and not, and not fighting one or the other, but just seeing and appreciating different sides of things and learning from it.
Yeah. Well, in complexity theory and chaos theory, when a system is going through deep transformation, it moves from sort of one value to this increasing progressions of bifurcations or polarities.
Yes.
And of course, you can see that happening now in almost every level of our community. And if you just are reacting in that, then things get worse and worse and worse. But this notion in chaos theory and complexity theory is that at these different points in it, it's possible to open up this space where the polarities actually integrate and create a new whole.
Yeah.
And I think we are in that, probably, more than at any other time in my lifetime. And now I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I don't know if you know that phrase.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting times for sure.
Interesting times. And we can see, I think everybody can feel we as humans may not make it. If we don't have this deep transformation, we won't, because this thing I was talking about at the beginning about the left brain, the thing that the left brain is able to do that seems to be new on the whole planetary consciousness is we have a consciousness that can unbind from time or space.
Mm-hmm.
We can imagine and go anywhere and imagine anything, and then be able to use that as our sort of our North Star.
Yeah.
So, in the 4 billion years of the planet, basically things have been in the circle of life, so things have not changed that fast, night and day and winter and summer and breathing in and breathing out. And so you have that circuit of rhythm of the opposites. But now we've got this other brain that can break that circuit. And so if it operates without a feeling of connection to the earth or to the body or to each other or to the rhythms of consciousness, it will destroy everything. Because we have now, I think it was 2 years ago, some world science organization officially declared we are now in the Anthropocene era, which means on the planet, it's what humans do that is most influential. We have the power we have the most power of anything on the whole planet. And if we're doing that unconsciously and blindly and not in connection to the wholeness of life, we have the power. I mean, look at when we split the atom. What have we done with it? Primarily, we're making nuclear bombs. If that mind that split the atom was connected to the heart and the soul of the world, we would be doing much more than splitting atoms. But so we need this deep transformational change, and we may not get that. It's getting pretty bad.
Yeah, but there is hope.
Yeah, I saw the Dalai Lama about, I don't know, 10 years ago, and he was doing an interview, and it's one of those hard-hitting interviews where the interviewer says, "Hello, Dolly. Do you think we're going to make it?" And of course, the answer is, "I don't know, but if we all pull together and sing Kumbaya." And he said, "It doesn't look like it." He wasn't cynical.
Yeah.
It's very, I mean, the way he said it was just as resonant to me as what he was saying.
Yeah.
I saw in the interviewer, like what I felt like is, you're not supposed to say that. And he says, well, don't you have hope? And he said again in that beautiful, wise, heart mind way, he said, in my tradition, we practice neither hope nor despair.
All right. Okay.
And he says, well, wouldn't it be terrible? Uh, and he said, yeah, it would be a really terrible tragedy. He said, well, how do you handle that? And then he said, and it's one of those things where you see it or feel it in somebody, you say, someday when I grow up, that's what I want. I thank you for letting me know, because I'm going to move towards that. I want to move towards that. He said, in my traditions, basically, he said, we have seen universes come and universes go.
Yeah. So it is. So in your universe, what are you excited for? What's coming?
I'm, the last 3 years was, I think, the greatest time of upheaval in my life. And I grew up in San Francisco in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
I was quarantined, so I had to be at home. And I really feel this connection, deeper connection to my heart mind.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful. And I realize this is so much deeper
Mm-hmm.
than all these incessant problems that our head is always worried about.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'm I'm really excited about this growing awareness that our true consciousness is not merely our ego, or in many ways, just if not more important, not merely human.
Mm-hmm.
That the trees and the rivers and the mountains are really our core mind.
Yeah.
Right? And that if they're always there, we're always inside of them.
Yeah, we're part of nature, right?
Yeah, that's nature is our mother.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So I usually meditate at least twice a day. And here in San Diego, you can meditate outside most of the time. We've been having horrific storms for the last 2 weeks in California. But
Oh, wow.
so I've been meditating, in this question, who was I before humans were here?
Mm-hmm.
And then like feeling myself as a tree
Mm-hmm.
or trees. And it's a really beautiful feeling. And I think it's what's calling us back home.
Yeah. Can you repeat that question for everybody? I think that's beautiful.
The question, the meditational question, contemplative question is, who was I before humans were here?
Yeah.
It's sort of there's the Zen koan. Who were you before your parents were born?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a sort of a takeoff on that. Or Virginia Satir used to ask couples, how did you fall in love together? Who were you before your marriage became a problem?
Right.
And who were you before trauma?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people think there was nothing before
Mm-hmm.
my life of suffering,
Mm-hmm.
but there is.
Yeah, and then
There is.
that sense of curiosity comes in again.
And that sense of, I don't know if you call it wisdom, not your wisdom, but the wisdom of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a beautiful way to not end the conversation, but for now.
So draw nice clothes. It's sort of like,
Exactly.
like somatic experiencing, you open and then
Yeah,
something comes into closure.
exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you again Stephen, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your presence, really.
It's a pleasure, Andrina. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
To get more of all that Stephen has to offer, I invite you to visit his website. You get the info on his trainings, on his workshops. You'll see his books. And of course, all the links are in the show notes for you to easily access them. And I thank Stephen again for his time, for his presence, for sharing all of what he shared so much. And I thank you, dear listener, for listening, for witnessing, and for being here.